And to that point, as I mentioned, in order to be here today, you had to submit a question. And here was a comment that came in. And I love what this person said. They said, "This is important work, and I'm looking to be a leader who leads from within with this work." And that is such an important lead in to the two people that you're going to be hearing from today. Myself, I've been working with BridgeWorks for 5 years, a company that's been dedicated to bridging the generational divide for over 20 years. And this is something that I am passionate about. I could not believe in anything more when it comes to valuing and respecting people. And you are going to, it's now my privilege to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Rose Chu, who serves as the Senior Systems Fellow at Minnesota Education Equity Partnership. But what I'm most excited about is she is someone who leads this work from within. For over 2 decades, she has dedicated herself to educating equity and excellence within young people. She has elevated the teaching profession by changing the public narrative about teachers, which, Dr. Chu, I don't think I told you, but my fiance is a teacher, and so I love that you're doing this. And also, what's really important with today, you began your career studying industrial and systems engineering. So you bring a perspective that's going to be so important when it comes to developing systems of change. And you are here with us today to coach on strategies to advance change through collective impact, relationships, and personal power. Welcome, Dr. Chu. We are so glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil. It's just an honor to be here.
Oh, the honor will be mine and everyone else who's joined us, as they will see very shortly. So one thing that I just learned right before the session, which I find fascinating, is when it comes to leading from within. We were talking about our personal cultural backgrounds, and you mentioned how you converse with people about having a PhD in happiness, like being someone who just kind of owns their own power, which I love, and it's going to be so important today. And as it relates to our topic today, I just want to tee up something that we discussed earlier. You talked to me about the fact that you are one of the original designers of the cultural competency training that teachers go through here in our state of Minnesota. But you mentioned that the word cultural competency really doesn't encompass everything that we should be thinking about when it comes to embracing this subject. So would you talk to me and our audience a little bit about your perspective on culture and how we should be perceiving this work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think given the moment that we're in, oftentimes we think of culture as if it is only about race and ethnicity. It is about, what we can see on the surface. And yet, if you really study culture, culture is both the things that are visible, the way we talk, the way we kind of like relate to each other, the way we behave in a meeting, the fact that you have a Zoom meetings now. This is a culture, right? As to how you do community conversation. That's all things we can see. The music, the events that happen. And yet what is deeper about culture is what we bring within us that is often unexamined. For example, our views on aging, our views on how we maybe solve a problem, our views on death, our views on taking care of each other, our views on money, okay? So all those views are oftentimes developed growing up, and they are unexamined, and we literally live them unconsciously. So when we think culture, we're going to broaden how we think of culture, so that when we say cultural competence, is really, I always tell people, I do this training and I don't call myself competent, because competence is an endpoint, right? Whereas I think of another word that is more in line with what I'm thinking, cultural humility. The fact that I want to be humble about what I know and what I don't know about others. And I also want to continue to also learn about myself. What are my views of others that are unexamined? What are my views about others that are actually not productive, that may be unexamined, maybe long-held beliefs that I just never thought. So it requires a little bit of courage, requires a little bit of like, okay, I'm going to do this. because I'm not willing to live unconsciously, right? We want to live consciously. So culture
Yes.
is one of those things where, like, if you think deeply, it is way beyond what we see. It is deeper than that. And I always think about how in relationships, sometimes things that are, people are like, how come he or she got so angry with something I say? And you realize that sometimes it's because it has emotional impact. Things that are our belief system, that are deep inside us, that are unexamined, our views, our way of thinking, our way of thinking, approaching life. Sometimes we don't think about it and we get mad because it's impeaching and it's impeding on that. It's like, how dare you say that? And then the other person said, I just said something. I didn't realize it was going to be such a disproportionate reaction. I know you have never had that happen before, Phil.
No, not me, not anyone on this call either.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying, right? That sometimes the emotional impact is more because they are below the surface. We call this the iceberg model of culture, that what is above the surface versus what is below the surface. And what is below the surface sometimes is what sometimes causes the conflict. And because we have never really talked about it at a level that really create that kind of understanding. Oh my goodness, deep down, the way you think of parenting is different than the way I think of it. Not good or bad, just different, right? Just different. Or money, oh my God, that's a big one. Money, right? We think of money differently. So yeah, I can go on about that. I mean, I have a lot of experience being somebody who grew up in Hong Kong. The first thing I experienced when I came in this country was watching like some comedy late shows. And I was shocked that you could actually make jokes about a president. Really? How can you do that? President in authority. And I realized there's a cultural difference, right? Like underneath, for me, I like, oh, you don't do that because there's an authority figure. Then I learned that it's not good or bad. It's just that we are making fun hopefully in a way that is more about, that's just life. We are human beings. We make fun of some things. And so it took me some adjustment to think about, okay, wow, that's a cultural difference right there that you can't see on the surface, right? You can't see until I look deeply as to why that upset me a little bit. Why did that upset me to watch it, right? So yeah, that's an example of kind of deep culture that we often don't think about.
Yes, and that's you gave so many good examples in there about how it gets embedded. And then I want to talk about how do we practice raising our consciousness to it, because we've already gotten one comment. Someone talked about the really appreciating the idea of cultural humility, which I know is something when I first asked you about what's better than cultural competency, you went directly to cultural humility. And in our generational work that we've done, as we've kind of brought those folks together, it is challenging because we don't realize that our perspective, we assume our perspective is right because it's our perspective. And then when someone comes with another perspective, well, they're obviously wrong because they're not thinking like me. And we talk in great detail about how these get there generationally, right? They're because of those experiences that we had in our formative years. You grew up, you just shared in Hong Kong. You wouldn't have experienced someone speaking negatively on public television about an authority figure. That's never been a part of your experience. But I'm curious, how do you, or what practices do you try to implement to raise your consciousness so you don't get fooled into allowing those deep-seated feelings to interrupt you from embracing another perspective?
Yeah, I would say, and I actually share this example with those that I do a lot of training with, is that sometimes those thoughts will come to our head and it is almost exercise. You have to practice stopping those thoughts. And here I am working on racial equity all my life, working on educational equity in general, right? And then there was one night, this is a true story. I was actually like noticing myself walking, and then I clutched my purse when I saw a young Black man walk by. And I had to stop myself. I go, oh my God, what just happened there? What just happened there?
Yes.
Here I am talking about racial equity, talking about how, there is racism, where we look at others as if they are lesser than. And here I am, have that reaction. So instead of kind of like ignoring it, I literally have to examine myself and say, wow, I've been racialized to think that somehow when I am alone walking because of my own safety and survival, I'm going to be alert. And that was my alert. So when I think about that, I think about how often we are racialized, or we are kind of like, we don't even realize that what we do is unconscious. So what does it mean to be conscious, right? What does it mean to stop? What does it mean to stop and be brave enough to interrogate yourself and say, what just happened there? Why did I just say what I say? Why did I just have that thought? Before you judge, because the minute you judge, you're going to feel bad, okay? Part of learning, right? Part of learning is to say, you know what? I'm human. I did that. Whoa, that was not good. And now I'm actually willing to share that, to show that I am vulnerable to the fact that we take in so much information and the information impact what we do without even knowing it. Okay.
Wow.
More than 90% of what we do is unconscious.
Yes.
Scary.
And
Scary, right?
you just said something. You said something that I found interesting. You said before you judge.
Yes.
And were you speaking specifically of even before you judge yourself?
Yes.
Yes,
and
I think so.
To judging others, right? Same thing. And it takes practice, right? Because you know what? We all revel in, oh my God, they are so wrong about it, because it feels good, right? It feels good to point the finger. It feels good to say, I'm right and you're wrong. And it takes practice to take a deep breath and say, okay, maybe before I judge either myself or another, could I be curious to ask some more questions? Could I maybe have some empathy and say, where is that coming from? Is there and in there that maybe I can connect? I may not agree, but I want to stay curious. I want to stay patient. I want to stay like connected as human, to say, is there something underneath it that I just need to learn more about that person? Because the minute you judge, the conversation stops. We all know that, right? So it's a practice. Believe me, it's a practice. And I just practiced that on my family, like during Memorial Day weekend. Believe me, that took a lot of practice. Kind of go, okay, do not judge, and just kind of like stay with it. And it takes a lot. And it takes me, right? So ultimately, it's also about me really having what I call a high life condition. That means self-care. We all know when we are tired, when we are feeling down, when we are constantly feeling like things are horrible and we don't find anything that is that I can be thankful for, then your life energy is low. When your life energy is low, that same situation that I had with my family might not have gone so well. Okay.
Right.
So it takes me, right? It takes me as a person to come with kind of prepared by taking care of myself, also taking care of myself, to be strong, to live in a way that no matter how bad things are, I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for the life that I have. So that's the way I live, to help me stay high life condition, I call that. So that's something to think about. Because if we don't do that, oh my God, everything is going to get to us, right? Everything can get to us, because there's so much to get to us, right? So much that can get to us.
And it goes back to that original comment. And that's why I led with it, where the person said, I want to be a leader who leads from within. So it starts with you. And I like the fact that you're giving a different paradigm for, I think, our group to think about. We've already had some comments. People really appreciated the fact that you were vulnerable about that story that you shared, but yet you also don't have to beat yourself up over it. You can recognize hey, vulnerable means being honest. It means a heightened consciousness. And it means, okay, I'm gonna practice on myself so that when someone else does an offense, I can treat them with the same dignity that I'm doing myself,
Absolutely.
is so society needs that rather than continuing to beat up on each other and ourselves. Ultimately, we've got a lot of questions to get through, and I want to make sure we stay on track. So because of your background in systems engineering and industry, one of the things we talked about in preparation for today was you mentioned how that training, was it your undergrad or your master?
Actually, undergrad and master's was industrial engineering, and then in my PhD days were going deeper into system engineering.
See, what's so unique with me about this is we get asked to speak to a lot of different industries, and some industries are more touchy-feely by nature. Usually when I'm speaking to educators, they get the importance of that human connection. When I speak to engineers, for example, they're just show me the numbers, show me the math, let's just get to the point. You seem to have developed this life, which is an amalgam of those different brains coming together, which is why I was so excited to have you come here. So I want to get to this next question. I want to start talking about how do we develop systems, because we hear so much about systemic racism, and we know society, we need to change. Change is inevitable, but we need to change in the right way. So this question came in, and I can't wait to hear what you say. Share your top 5 initiatives that companies should have in place to cultivate diversity and inclusion as a core competency within the workplace. So build a system for us. What needs to happen in order for this to really get embedded into the culture of an organization?
So let me preface by, when I think about system change, we kind of use that word a lot, right? We use the word system a lot. We use system change a lot. And I want us to think about system change beyond the kind of normal way that we think about how, well, if only policies change, if only government change something, if only the management tell us something else to do, okay? And the framework that I use for system change, and it's not my own, but it's something that really connected with me, is the idea that systems change is about advancing equity by shifting conditions that keep a problem in place. I have not found a better definition, okay? Advancing systems change. Oh no, say that again. Systems change is about advancing equity by shifting conditions that keep a problem in place, okay? So I don't want us to do DEI work because we all are inclusive and we love it. What is it that we are shifting, okay? So oftentimes we talk about changing policy, changing laws, changing regulations, changing things that are structural, which is important, but not sufficient, okay? The level that oftentimes don't get talked about is the relational part. You're gonna go, duh, right? It makes sense that transforming a system, any system, is really about the people. It's about transforming the relationships of the people in the system, okay? So what is the quality of the relationships of the people in the system? And when I say system, it could be at your department, it could be at your company, it could be with your clientele, it could be the different levels of system. And then we also talk a lot about, well, who's making decisions? Who's at the table? Who are we hearing and who are we not hearing? Okay. If I think that I have a good relationship with my clients and I go to them to ask them for input about, say, diversity, I'm making this up. But then you ask them for that, but then you never follow up. Or that they are always being asked to give you something, but then they are never considered a leader. They are never considered where they're gonna lead in something. They're gonna help me make a decision in something. Then your change can only go so far. Okay? So that level of system change is where some of those, I think some of those strategies that you want me to talk about will come from. And then the final one is very transformative, because it's kind of what we've talked about. It's about what is in our heart. That's the way we think, right? If we don't examine ourselves and our views and what is in our heart, what are our negative tendency of how we think of another, I don't ask that you respect everybody, but we got to start with the baseline that everyone, that we extend dignity to everyone, regardless of what they do or not do, and you don't agree with their views. By us being humans, we have value. By us as human, we have self-worth. If we cannot start there, that's the part we need to examine. What is it that I'm thinking about? The thing that, oh no, you know what? These folks, maybe they're not as smart. Why do we think that? Right? Or they don't have anything to give me, right? I'm going to keep asking them, and then I'll go tell them how to do something. Where is that coming from? Right? If we don't examine that, well, we can't go very far. So some of the things I talk about is like, as organizations, we got to create those spaces where those relationships can happen. Whether it is affinity groups, right? Affinity groups does not have to be by race and ethnicity alone. It could be by function. It could be by age, for that matter. Now we're going to be careful because we want to make sure that people are comfortable doing that. So it could be by whatever, that it could be coming from the employers and the staff, the employees and the staff, to say, what kind of groups would you like where you're creating a safe and brave space? Not just safe, we all want to be safe, but brave space where people feel like I can share some things that maybe otherwise I won't be able to share. Okay. And not only create those space, but also have, like, people have to feel like that the company have their back, right? That I'm willing to, that I have permission to try things, that I can build power, that I could actually say, you know what, that group came up with a great idea. Is management going to invest in a little bit so that we could actually do something? Or is it like we keep talking? And that's why sometimes groups don't work, is that, yes, we have this space so we keep talking, but then nothing happens. Because if we don't create the space to build power, then people feel like, yep, you let us talk, great. We have this space so we keep coming together, but then nothing seems to change. We are still not part of a decision-making process. We're still not providing our input that actually go somewhere, right? People are resigned. I feel resigned when I feel like you keep coming to ask me things and then I don't see where it's going to go. There is no feedback loop, right? When there is no feedback loop, that's how people feel resigned. People feel very resigned. Another one I think about is a little bit more technical, is that I would love that the idea of DEI becomes gone, that field is gone. Because you know why? I would love to envision that DEI is just part of how you operate an organization, where you see and you hear your staff, your clients, your stakeholders for who they are and what they bring to the table, right? That's the culture part. Do you assume that just because they all look a certain way, we make assumption about who they are? Or because, you know, this group are the ones on the assembly line, so thereby I'm going to assume who they are and not realize that they have power, they have ideas that maybe we have not heard, right? So until we get there, what are the policies and practices within an organization that maybe we need to like examine?
Right.
Look at some of those and say, wow, when we say that, which groups are we disparaging? Are there groups that we really leave out when we have a practice like that? Whatever.
I want to capture some of these thoughts that you've just shared, because they, I think throughout your commentary, it hit so many parts. The 5 initiatives, you know, these are, I'm assuming, kind of like, often I find myself a left brain thinker. Just tell me step by step. I build things. So I want to know step by step, what do I do? And I just want to cover on some of these things that you just shared before I go into the next question, and that is, how do we measure success? Because you landed in a really important place where you said, you know, aspirationally, how great will it be when this conversation, we don't need a DE&I thing because it is our DNA.
Exactly.
And you talked about, the importance of affinity groups, but it goes back to something we said about culture. It's not just what we see on the outside, but it's truly understanding who people are on the inside. You said that the whole foundation of this is rooted in the quality of relationships. And again, so many times we want that step-by-step solution, but we know relationships aren't that easy. If it was, there would be a handbook to raising children, and you would just go click, 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 and raise perfect human beings. But we know it's more important than that. And there's a quote that I really love, and it says, "What you don't understand, you don't value." And I think we don't spend enough time understanding people. And this last year, I've been really, hey, here's a positive result in my life because of the whole quarantine. I've been trying to invest in the science of human beings. You talked about the importance of human beings. And so our work in sociology and generational understanding is overflowed into this DE&I course because we try to understand where people are coming from. And if you didn't see it before, you can scroll up in the chat. Someone captured the definition of systems change. Great. Advance equity by shifting the conditions that keep a problem in place. And you pointed me to some great resources. So I've been researching this a little bit. I found that quote and many others like it from an organization. We're not promoting them, but type that quote in and you can get lots of great information on how do you practically challenge those conditions or get your head around what are the conditions that keep people keep the problems in place. But the next question was, what goals should companies pursue, and how can organizations build DE&I initiatives that can be measured? And when we spoke before, you said something that I found almost a little, I'll be honest, at first a little like, I guess I'm going to use the word offensive, like, really? We shouldn't do that? Because here, education is trying to find, in Minnesota, we're a northern state. There's not the same amount of cultural reflection. And so often we're trying to find that equity, that parity in terms of, do the teachers reflect the students and so forth? And you almost challenge that a little bit. So what should our measurable goals be when we think about this work?
So there is the normal ones, right? Like, okay, for example, if I'm going to have an affinity group and we're going to create a space for people to be safe and brave, to be able to talk about things that maybe they are not willing to talk about. So there's some unity in numbers, right? So if you feel like, oh my God, I am not alone in this, right? So what is the measure there? The measure is not just that you have 5 groups. That's one measure. The next measure is, what changed as a result of the company understanding the deep concerns and barriers and the hopes and dreams of this group of people, whatever the affinity is, right? It could be affinity because there are people who have some disabilities that I'm making up, like, there is, right? There are people who have disability and nobody see, and they feel left out. They feel like their voice is never heard. And when they got together, they realized that, oh my God, I'm not the only one, right? And then together they realized that, hey, let's do something about it. What are some things that we would love management to hear us and to make some changes, right? If those changes, now I'm not saying overnight, but there is nothing. If your goal is just to have them talk, but you don't follow through with some immediate changes, small wins, some medium changes, and some long-term changes, you haven't made any impact. That's one way to measure, right? Another way to measure is about the policies. If you have policies that is disparaging some groups versus others, and sometimes this is where data is a friend of, it's a friend. It's a set. If you look at if you look at our board, we are not very, very diverse in many ways, in maybe experience, in age, in ethnic and racial ethnic groups, right? Whatever that is, whatever you're measuring, the data tells you something. Now, what do you do? What is it that you're going to do in order to say, I'm going to set a target? We're going to set a target. Some things that are doable short term, right? And to get there, you're not going to say, well, I'm going to just go out to the street and just recruit people to the board. That's where relationships come from, right? Those structural changes cannot happen alone without paying attention to the relationship. A small, for example, a minority or own business owner is not going to join your board if you have never talked to them, you have never like connected with them. All of a sudden you have a diversity goal that you want to check off and you go, come join our board. Right? You know, I don't want to be like the only person in there. So relationships matter, right? But you got to do, have to set the goal and say, wow, the data is telling us something that we that's not what we aspire. We aspire to be something different, right? So measurement of impact oftentimes really gets at the why. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Are we doing this because it's a checkbox of like increasing this number and that number? Or what is it? What is the culture? What is the headline that you want your organization to be about when people talk about how you work there? What does it mean to work there? How do you feel when you work there? What is that headline? Again, the long-term vision is that there is no DEI department. There is no DEI person. There is no DEI program. When you are part of this culture in this organization, you are seen, you are heard. You know that you can make mistakes. You know that you have to, you know, that the company has your back, the management has your back. You know that you are always learning. You know that you really respect and extend the dignity of each other, right? There are some of those values that are beyond the numbers, right? And how do your personal why connect with the organizational why? And we often don't talk enough about that why. So that DEI is not just a trend. It cannot be just a trend, right? It has to be deeper than that.
I love what you said.
I can keep going. Oh my God.
No, I love what you said about, you know, the management says we're gonna have this initiative so we can check this box. So we should invite, you know, Rose Chu to be a part of our meeting. And Rose is saying, this is the first time you've talked to me and now you want my opinion. So the relationship has to start before the request, if I'm hearing you correctly. Something else I want to refer to before I ask you to give us maybe even a few more concrete ideas on how to implement this into a system. You said something about you have to create safe and brave spaces. And, you know, we get a lot of requests and we've been offering insights around psychological safety, which I think is really important. But I like that you added the brave spaces. So I think if I'm understanding you correctly, when, you know, as a leader, I want to create an environment where people feel like they're respected, they're valued, they can make mistakes, that their contribution is respected. But at the same time, it's a brave space. They're not just safe, but also we're gonna push each other to be better and grow and not just be comfortable with where we're at, but let's get stronger in the process. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Especially around, especially when, so we all bring our own culture, right? It kind of comes back to the culture again. We all bring our own culture to the space. And then the space, whatever that space is, the minute you have a small group, you're going to create your own culture, okay? And so when you have a group of people and in a space that can be brave, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be on the first day that I'm going to tell you all these like secrets or all these things that are really deep in me that I've been keeping. But you start with getting to know each other, right? Assuming, you make the assumption that we are all in this because we all have stories and your story is as real to you and nobody can invalidate that. My perception of something is my reality and nobody can tell me, well, that's wrong. You can't think that way. Yeah, I can, right? So setting up that kind of environment to have that kind of norm is part of the culture of creating that brave space. And I love it. And it's not easy, but it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary.
Most certainly. We just for those of you that are in attendance, I'm noticing there's a couple questions that have been coming in as the conversation has gone on. We will make sure that we get to those. We're about 7 or 8 minutes away from our open Q&A questions. So please, if don't feel bad if we haven't gotten to it, because I'm watching it and I'm very grateful that those questions are coming in. I want, this is kind of a concrete application of everything we've talked about so far before we get to just a few other questions about how to influence others, how to get people on board. But one person, they said this, they said, could these systems be put in place to create societal changes such as building wealth opportunities through homeownership for all income levels, cultural backgrounds, and ethnicities? If so, how? So in other words, that's their passion. They want to create a place where people of all backgrounds have the same wealth opportunities and own homes. And it feels like, systemically, it is more challenging for some members of our communities than others. So this is a big ask, but what's an idea or two if you're trying to influence society to say, here's how we could make something like that happen?
Yeah, and I think I go back to those conditions, right? If you recognize that, I can think of the same question and replace it with the criminal justice system, the education inequity, right? Which is what I work on mostly.
Right.
Is that we often think of the system so big that sometimes it's so complex that we don't even know where to start because it's so big, right? And this is where I sometimes think about what is our personal power in the matter? What is our personal sense that we can be part of the solution? And what does it mean to enroll others to be part of the solution? So for example, if you think about the wealth gap issue, we can talk about changing all the rules, changing all the laws, putting all the money in to fix the problem. Again, as I said, that's not sufficient. Okay, it's not sufficient to do that. You got to think about, so are we doing that because somebody told us to, or who are those impacted, and what do they have to say? Do they feel like they are being heard? Do they feel like they are part of the solution? Or are these laws and policies and regulations done to them? I know how I feel when, when I was a former teacher in the classroom, we always feel sometimes like, yep, these things are done to us. We are supposed to do this and this and this and this. We had no say about it, right? It's almost like we just gave our power away. It's like we have no say about that. And yet, when I think about it, it's like we might not have say about that particular regulation, but in the classroom, how I implement that regulation, this kids are in front of me. This is my environment. This is my learning environment. It is my system. I actually can do something about that based on the law that I have to follow, right? That's a very, a shift in how we think about our relationship to all this stuff that are done to us, right? Done to, in quotes, right? So for me, when you think about systems change, we need to think about the levels of policies and structures and regulations and practices and all that. We also need to think about who are we not hearing that maybe we need to hear from? Who are the people impacted the most that we haven't related in a way that really understand their hopes and dreams and really examine our assumptions about them, right? In teaching, we always say, oftentimes we kind of think stuff like, oh, poor students, they don't have this and that. And so I go, okay, some of it is true. There are barriers, but look at, if we only think of it that way, we have left out the fact that there are assets they have that we have not like tapped into. There are brilliance they have that we have not tapped into. There are parents, they know more than one language. They know, they have lived through more than one culture. Guess what? They know more than many of us, right? About adversity. How are we tapping into that so that we can learn from them? That's a whole different way of relating to how do we change whatever the problem is, right? In my case was about achievement gap, opportunity gap. In this case will be about wealth gap. Like, have we really connected with the very people that are impacted? And then examine what are the mental models that we have been unexamined, where we assume certain things about certain groups and certain ways that they are thinking about money, or certain ways that they are thinking of why they can and cannot do something. Those require us examining ourselves again, come back to us examining ourselves again, and then look at how to create those spaces for those conversations to have, so that you deepen the quality of the relationships and the sharing of power. This is gonna say, oh my God, some of them means that I don't know where it's gonna go because I don't know what ideas they have. But that's
I love that.
Right?
You talk a lot about understanding your own power. I've said, what you don't understand, you don't value.
Yep.
And you said two key things. One, you have to, hey, as a teacher, I can implement this how I choose. So that's your own power, but also looking at your students or someone, in your case, a student or a member of your community who you're saying, I want to help this person achieve their full potential, but to start it from the standpoint that they have power, there's, that I don't even understand because of their unique experience, and to start with that mindset. Because we had several questions, and I'll tell you the most common question that we get when we've done these conversations, and again, we're a couple of minutes away just from getting to your open questions. A friend of mine is on this call. They said hi to me and they asked a question. I haven't talked to this person, I've seen them in a long time, but hi, Stacy. But the most common question we get is, how do we get leaders to buy into this? And you keep coming back to this idea, and I want you to be very specific. Like, you keep saying, like, whoa, I start with me and I demonstrate it. I'm the person I have power over. And but what do how do you influence? How do you make that happen? How do you get leaders, or is that the best way, just to model that power and the change that can happen?
Couple of things I can think about. When we think about leaders who should do something, right? They should be doing something, they should be on board. Have we reached out in a way that we actually understand where they're coming from? You don't have to agree again. Right? It comes back to relationships, because guess what? It's easy to say, yep, if only that boss do this and do that, right? If only they change, our company, our department would be in a different place. But when was the last time, either as a department or as a group or as a person, really understand and relate to this leader that you're having problems with from a human to human standpoint? Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I have always kept in mind is that it is easy to talk to each other where we have our own echo chamber, right? Because we agree on the most part. But amazingly, we have also heard stories where, like, well, you know what, you and I have nothing in common, but as we got to know each other, we realized that we have we both have a daughter who plays hockey. I'm making this up, okay? Or we both have a kid who has autism, right? So how do you get to know a person beyond the surface, right? Beyond the surface of what we think we know, where it got to a point where we are both transformed, because, like, wow, I got to know something about him in a way that I never did. That's hard.
You influence people through relationship. It all comes back to relationship.
Yes. And not because I'm going to go in talking to Phil because I have something to make him change his mind. Yes. Right? I want to talk to Phil because I genuinely want to know, like, how does he think? Like, what am I curious about? Like, what does it look like on the other side as a leader, right? Say running a big corporation. Like, what are the things that they have to think about? What are their hopes and dreams? What are the concerns and considerations that some of us never have to consider? I'm not saying that you have to agree, but the minute you start doing that, you realize that, oh, wow, okay, now let's talk, right? Now let's talk about right? I have an idea and I would love to hear what you think. Okay.
Yeah. This is, I want to get to some of these questions that are coming in before we run out of time, but I will tell you, in all honesty, this is not popular advice these days. You don't, when the leader's holding, preventing the change from happening, we tend to go after the leader, and you're suggesting something a little bit different, which is probably going to take a time for people to process. But I also want to emphasize something you said. Chris Voss, who is a hostage negotiator, he always says tactical empathy doesn't mean you agree with the person. You don't have to, believe what they believe, but you have to take the time to understand where they're coming from, which is really important. So let's get to some questions before we run out of time here. I backed up in the chat. I'm going to go back to a question that came in from Todd, I believe. I don't want to mispronounce his last name. But the question was, Dr. Chu, you mentioned that 90% of what we do is unconscious. Can you talk more about the research on that suggestion? Can we also have a conscious mind that intercedes often on our behavior. Can you talk about the relationship between our conscious and unconscious mind? This is a subject that I love, so I'm looking forward to your answer.
And there is actually boundless research about that. And one of the researcher that really pull a lot of this research together, he is a Nobel Prize economist and psychologist, and I'm not going to remember his name right now. Kent Henneman. He talks about I'll get it. Okay, if I remember that, I'll make sure I let you know. But the idea is that if you think about how easily we are influenced by, say, product placement. Okay, think about that. So the psychology is that we sometimes walk into a store and we just think that we need something. It's only because we have seen it placed all over the place in a movie or in walking by the mall or something. We are actually more gullible than we think. We're way more gullible than we think, because you know what? We have too much to process. So it is a survival skill that we kind of bring everything to a model. Like models are approximation to reality. So we have models of how the world works because we have to. Imagine every time I pick up a phone and I have to look at this and go, this is a rectangular shape, and this is like, what is this again? Like if we have to process the amount of information just looking at the phone, we can't survive. So it's a survival tool that we process information very quickly, and oftentimes then when it is very quickly over time, it's automatic. Like you go into a restaurant, you don't expect to say, like, what is that thing on the table there? What is that thing here? What is, like, you don't, you just do it. And sometimes when things don't work the way we want, like the script is in our head, that's when we go, hey, how come I didn't have good service? I'm expecting good service because you have a script in your head. That's human nature, okay? So, however, because of that, sometimes we let the automatic take over, and we forget that we actually have also a reasoning mind, right? We have a mind where we problem solve, where we analyze things, where we synthesize things. So to go from the conscious to unconscious to conscious, again, is a practice. It's a practice. I
appreciate that. Oh, sorry. I just want to.
Does that make sense? So there's a lot of research about that. It is true that we are more gullible than we think, and it takes conscious effort to say, wait, I just had that thought. Thanks for sharing. Let me analyze that. That takes conscious effort, and we can do it.
This is the mind. Yeah, this is a fundamental element of the training that we offer at BridgeWorks to help people understand what they're just accepting as normal and raising their awareness of, you have to think about this a little bit more. So that's why I asked earlier, how do you practice that personally? Because I so believe in this, and I love the examples that you gave. I just want to comment, and this is why I brought this up. One of our attendees today, an African-American guest, I'm assuming, talked about it's exhausting sometimes feeling like people aren't speaking up on our behalf as a Black person. And it would be nice if someone, until someone else speaks up, we feel the need to, we've got to continue to raise this consciousness. So I appreciated this point. And I just want to highlight, I'm not even going to embed a question here, but on one hand, what makes these discussions good is because we have so many different cultures and different perspectives represented here. And to those of us who might feel like, man, no one's speaking up on my behalf. These folks are here because we're all trying to listen and understand one another. But I would say if you find yourself seeing someone a little like drained because of the environment, I love what Dr. Chu has shared all along. Like, it's important to reach out and build relationship and understand where they're coming from, because it's exhausting, and
It's exhausting.
that
Yeah.
fostering that relationship will be key. So here's the question from my friend who came in. Love to hear from Dr. Rose. Any strategies for encouraging strategic partners, other department work teams, or embrace system change? My team is committed to this work, but the systems we need to change extend beyond our division. How do we best engage others in this work? So again, probably the most common question that we often get is, how do I get other people to be as excited about this as I am?
Yeah. You know, I mean, we'll come back to relationships again, right? You start by understanding their work, understanding what is their why. If you think about it, all of us want to feel like we belong to something. All of us feel like we want to be part of a solution to make something greater, right? So if you look at another department and say, oh, we just need them to do DEI work, that's not really understanding, like, what is it about their work that make them want to get up in the morning and say, yep, we are doing work that are important, right? So I would say, right, really relating to them more, understanding who they are, right? The other thing is to also maybe think about kind of like understanding the why, right? Sharing our own stories, because I think stories is how we are made up. Sometimes, you know, I think some of you may know this. There is a TED Talk that has been talked about. I mean, that has been viewed like so much. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. The idea is that if I were to hold a piece of paper and I, you know, like today you talk to me about, you know, we are talking about certain things. That's a part of me. That's not all of me, right? So when we start talking about stories, stories is kind of like filled out who we are, why we do the work. Why is it important that in our department, we decide to embark on this journey of equity and inclusion? Right? Like, how do you share this in a way that people get at your why, right? Get at like your deep why, not because of the numbers, but because we believe that in the work, whatever department you're in, that by doing this work, we will be able to achieve XYZ. This is the vision we have for the wealth, right? For more people achieving wealth, or for more people to access XYZ, whatever that is, right? If you start there, so it's both, right? Both relating to them as human beings, to get to know them, get to know their work, get to know their why, and then sharing your own stories about your why. And I think this is where data might be important too, right? As an organization, what kind of data do you have that inform us? Not data to comply, but data that is actually informative, data that is instructive, data that is illuminating. Okay, I oftentimes think about this work as more like, what is it? What can we have that allow us to even shift just a tiny bit of how we see a problem or a situation that could illuminate new ideas? What if we have a more nuanced conversation that gives us more nuanced solution? What if, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's very general, but because, you know, it's so dependent on the context that sometimes I find myself like, well, it's kind of hard to give you like a concrete, because I got to understand your context. Context matter. But at a high level, it's about your relationship. It's about understanding people's why, right? The deep reason why we do the work that we do.
I think that's so key. And the better we understand our why, then the question becomes, why wouldn't you want that thing that you're so passionate about to impact a broader audience? So if you don't take the time to understand all those different cultures and perspectives, and you just fashion the thing you love to meet a certain mindset, you're limiting everything. The impact of it's good, you're limiting the impact of your revenue if it's a good or service that you're providing, your impact, you're just limiting yourself. And so I love that when you talk about understanding perspective just creates the opportunity for new solutions, because I'm also inviting a different perspective into my psyche. And we see that again generationally. So often you have the power structure who've just been around longer, and this goes back for the beginning of time, wielding their power over the next generation, and then it happens again. But really, it's a give and take. It's understanding each other and enjoying the benefits of expanding our mind because of those different perspectives. And again, you can expand that to gender, culture, and it faith. You continues
religion.
on.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that sometimes when you really listen to what people say, we all have dreams of someday. Oftentimes, the obstacles and the concerns are what I call considerations. If we can distinctively hear that differently, you will be able to solve, your problem differently, right? It's not that like, how would the people not want this? They actually do. But if you listen to them, it's that they are worried about this. They are worried about the fear. They're worried about all these other things. That's a different way of solving, right? That's a different set of solutions. Then let's stick with, like, we got the why down. We know we want this. Let's figure out how to work through those considerations. That's a different conversation. Does that make sense?
I love that. It makes perfect sense. We are now at the end of our time, so I so appreciate that. I want to, as we were talking, I told you it would go by fast. For all of you that are interested, Dr. Chu, she does 6-hour trainings, and even at that feels like there's never enough time. So I knew we would fly by. There's a quote here by Brenda Ulan, which I'm just going to wrap up with. It says, "When we are listened to, it creates us, makes us unfold and expand. Ideas actually begin to grow within us and come to life." And so this whole conversation is about learning to listen to one another and the good that it can cause. We'll continue this series on a monthly basis. I think we have another session coming up at the end of July 29th. Maybe Krista can put that in the chat there. So keep an eye out for our next session. And thank you all for attending today. Dr. Chu, thank you so much for your passion and for living this from within.
Thank you. And I just found the book. I'm going to put it in the chat too. There you go.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.